The night before her execution, Catherine Howard asked for the chopping block to be brought to her cell. Not to pray over it, not to weep beside it, but to practice laying her head upon it. Again and again and again. A teenage girl, alone in the darkness of the Tower of London, rehearsing her own death like a stage performance she'd never survive. History remembers the execution. But what happened in those final hours before dawn, what she endured in the cold silence of that stone chamber, that's where the real horror lies. If you're ready to face what the Tudor courts tried to bury in silence and shame, subscribe to Grimoryx now. Join those who refuse to let history's darkest truths fade into comfortable lies. Leave a like if this already grips you. Comment what you think happened in that cell. Share this with those who seek the truth behind the crown's carefully crafted narratives. This is Grimoryx, where we document the darkness history tried to forget. Catherine Howard was approximately 19 years old when they came for her. Some historians argue she was younger, perhaps 17, perhaps even 16. The records are deliberately vague, as if her youth was something to be obscured, something inconvenient to the narrative that would follow. She had been Queen of England for barely 16 months. 16 months of silk and ceremony, of sleeping beside a king whose body was rotting from the inside out, of smiling through banquets while whispers slithered through the corridors like smoke. She was arrested on the 5th of November, 1541. Guy Fawkes Night, though that particular association wouldn't come until decades later. Still, the symbolism clings: betrayal, conspiracy, fire waiting to ignite. They took her from Hampton Court Palace in the dead of night, though some accounts suggest it was late afternoon. The details blur when horror becomes history. What doesn't blur is the screaming. Catherine ran through the galleries, her voice tearing through the palace as she tried to reach the king, Henry VIII, her husband, the man who had once called her his rose without a thorn. The guards caught her before she reached the chapel. They dragged her back, her fingernails scraping against wood and stone, her cries dissolving into the thick tapestries that lined the walls. Henry never came. He was told, of course. He heard the commotion, but he never came. Some say he wept privately, mourning the girl he had loved with the obsessive intensity only a tyrant can manage. Others say he simply turned away, already composing the narrative that would justify what came next. Either way, Catherine screamed into silence, and the silence swallowed her whole. They moved her to Sion Abbey first. Not the Tower, not yet. Sion was a former monastery dissolved during Henry's break with Rome, repurposed into a holding place for inconvenient women. Catherine was kept under house arrest there for weeks, isolated from everyone she had ever known, surrounded by women tasked with watching her every move. Not servants, observers, witnesses to her unraveling. She was not allowed visitors, not allowed letters. Not allowed anything that might tether her to the world she had briefly ruled. The charges against her were adultery and treason. She had, the court claimed, engaged in sexual relationships before her marriage to the king, relationships she had failed to disclose. Worse, she had allegedly continued a relationship with Thomas Culpeper, a member of Henry's privy chamber, during her time as queen. The evidence was extracted through torture, through coercion, through the grinding machinery of a state that had already decided her guilt. Francis Dereham, one of her alleged lovers from before her marriage, was tortured until he confessed. Thomas Culpeper, the courtier, was interrogated until his words could be twisted into treason. Catherine herself was never tortured physically, but what they did to her mind was perhaps more efficient. They told her she would be spared if she confessed. They told her the king was merciful. They told her many things, and she, young and terrified and utterly alone, believed them. She confessed to a pre-contract with Dereham, a relationship from her youth that, if legally recognized, would have invalidated her marriage to Henry. She admitted to meetings with Culpeper, though the nature of those meetings remains historically contested. Some say they were innocent. Some say they were not. What matters is that Catherine, in her desperation to survive, gave them exactly what they needed to destroy her. On the 10th of February 1542, she was moved to the Tower of London. The same tower where Anne Boleyn, Henry's second wife, had been executed less than 6 years earlier. The same cold stones, the same narrow windows, the same inexorable march toward the scaffold. Catherine would have known this. She would have walked through those gates knowing that no queen had ever left the tower alive once accused of adultery against the king. Still watching but not subscribed. Don't let this be the last dark truth you uncover. Subscribe to Grimoryx. She was given apartments in the tower, not a dungeon, but not freedom either. Comfortable imprisonment, as if silk cushions could soften the weight of certainty. The lieutenant of the tower at the time was Sir John Gage, a man who had overseen Anne Boleyn's final days. He knew the rhythm of these things, the waiting, the slow collapse of hope, the way a person begins to hollow out when death becomes not a possibility but a schedule. Catherine reportedly spent those days in a state of vacillating emotion. Sometimes she wept uncontrollably, her body racked with sobs that echoed through the stone chambers. Other times she was eerily calm, almost detached, as if she had already left her body and was merely observing from somewhere far away. The accounts describe her as swinging between hysteria and numbness, the psychological symptoms of a person trapped in a waking nightmare with no exit. She asked for the block. This detail appears in multiple historical accounts recorded by those who witnessed her final days. She asked that the executioner's block be brought to her chamber so that she could practice placing her head upon it, so that she could rehearse the final moment. So that when the time came, she would know exactly how to position herself, how to kneel, how to die with whatever dignity remained available to a condemned queen. Think about that. A teenager, alone in a cold room, kneeling before a wooden block, lowering her head again and again, imagining the weight of the axe, the bite of the blade, the sudden severance of consciousness. What does that do to a mind? What kind of terror drives someone to rehearse their own execution? Was it a desperate attempt at control, the only control she had left? Or was it something darker, a psychological breaking point where death became preferable to the waiting? The night before her execution, she requested a specific gown. Not the white shift traditionally worn by those about to be beheaded. She would wear that at the scaffold, but a gown for the hours leading up to dawn. She chose her clothing carefully, as if appearance still mattered, as if the world would remember her for more than the way her head rolled into the straw. Witnesses reported that she was composed that final night, eerily so, as if she had passed through fear and arrived at something colder. Acceptance, perhaps, or resignation, or the complete dissolution of the self. She was not given a trial. Let that sink in for a moment. Catherine Howard, Queen of England, was executed without ever standing before a court. Parliament passed a bill of attainder against her, a legislative act that declared her guilty without the inconvenience of evidence or defense. Henry pushed the bill through personally, his grief or rage or shame manifesting as bureaucratic efficiency. She was condemned by paperwork. Her life ended not with a jury's verdict but with the scratch of a quill on parchment. The execution was set for the 13th of February 1542. A Monday, cold, gray, London wrapped in February fog, the kind that muffles sound and obscures vision, that makes the world feel smaller and more suffocating. Catherine woke before dawn. Some accounts say she slept fitfully. Others say she didn't sleep at all, that she spent the entire night on her knees before the block, whispering prayers or perhaps just breathing, counting each breath as one closer to the last. They came for her at 7 in the morning. The execution was not public. Henry, perhaps out of some lingering sense of shame or scandal management, ordered it to be private. Only a small group of witnesses would be present, officials, tower staff, those whose presence was required by protocol. No cheering crowds, No vendors selling pies, just cold stone and colder silence. Catherine walked to the scaffold inside the tower grounds, the same scaffold where Anne Boleyn had died. The same executioner, possibly a Frenchman brought in specifically for the task, skilled with the sword rather than the clumsy English axe. But no, the records suggest it was an axe for Catherine. An English execution, brutal, less precise. She wore a black gown, velvet perhaps, though the descriptions vary. Her hair was pinned up, her neck exposed, pale against the dark fabric. Witnesses reported that she looked smaller than they remembered, as if the weeks in the tower had physically diminished her, as if fear and isolation had compressed her into something fragile and ghostly. She gave a short speech. This was customary, a final statement from the condemned. But Catherine's words were strange, disjointed. She did not proclaim her innocence. Instead, she asked for prayers, acknowledged her sins, though whether she meant the accusations or something deeper, something more existential, remains unclear. Some historians believe she was protecting others, that by accepting guilt she spared her family further persecution. Others think she had simply internalized the narrative of her own monstrosity, that weeks of isolation and psychological pressure had convinced her she truly deserved this. She knelt. The block was there waiting, familiar now after hours of practice. She lowered her head, positioned herself just as she had rehearsed. Did she think about her childhood in that moment, about the lavender fields of Lambeth? About her grandmother's house where she had lived before being thrust into the glittering nightmare of court? Or was her mind already gone, fled to wherever minds go when the body knows what comes next? The executioner raised the axe. One stroke, the accounts say, a single blow, efficient, professional. Her head separated from her body and fell into the straw scattered across the scaffold. Blood pooled, dark and thick, steaming in the cold February air. Her body remained kneeling for a moment, the muscles holding position even after the brain had ceased to send signals before collapsing forward. They buried her in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the tower grounds, an unmarked grave initially. She lay near Anne Boleyn, the two queens who had loved and been destroyed by the same king, their bones mingling in the earth beneath the chapel floor. No ceremony. No prayers recorded for posterity, just silence and stone and the slow forgetting that follows state-sanctioned murder. But here's what history often omits. Here's the part that haunts more than the execution itself. In the weeks between her arrest and her death, Catherine wrote letters. Desperate pleading letters to Henry, begging for mercy, proclaiming her love, her loyalty, her willingness to do anything, if he would only spare her. These letters were never answered. Henry never wrote back. He simply moved forward with the machinery of her destruction, attending banquets, planning his next marriage, erasing her as if she had never existed. One letter survived. In it, Catherine doesn't beg for her life, she begs for a chance to see him, just once, to explain. To speak her truth directly to his face. The letter never reached him, or if it did, he ignored it. She died without ever seeing him again, without ever hearing his voice, without any confirmation that she had ever mattered beyond being a body in his bed and a name on his list of failures. The psychological torture of that, the waiting, the silence, the slow realization that no rescue was coming, that may have been worse than the physical act of execution. The axe took seconds. The fear, the isolation, the unraveling of hope that took weeks. Every morning she woke up wondering if this would be the day. Every night she lay down uncertain if she would see another dawn. The human mind is not built to withstand that kind of sustained terror. It fractures, it breaks, and perhaps that's why she practiced with the block. Perhaps it wasn't about dying gracefully. Perhaps it was about seizing control of the only thing she had left, the manner of her death. If she couldn't control when or why, she could at least control how. She could face the blade with her eyes open, her neck positioned correctly, her final moment choreographed down to the smallest detail. It was an illusion of agency, But illusions are all we have when reality becomes unbearable. Catherine Howard was one of many women destroyed by Henry VIII's regime. But her youth, her terror, the documented hours she spent preparing for her own beheading, these details pierce through the centuries in a way that statistics and dates cannot. She was a girl, a teenager. Thrust into a world of political machinations she barely understood, married to a man who could order her death as easily as he ordered dinner, and then discarded when she became inconvenient. History remembers Henry as a king, a reformer, the founder of the Church of England. Catherine is remembered as a cautionary tale if she's remembered at all. The rose without a thorn who turned out to have thorns after all. But in that cell in those final hours there were no narratives, no lessons. Just a girl kneeling before a block, practicing the last thing she would ever do. Some shadows never fade, they wait in the cold corners of the tower, in the chapel where queens are buried in silence. Subscribe to Grimoryx to witness more forgotten truths. Hit like if you felt the weight of Catherine's final hours. Drop a comment below, tell us what haunts you most about her story. Share this with those who seek the darkness behind the crown. This is Grimoryx, where history's buried screams are finally heard.